Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Sales is King. Dan Sixsmith here. Happy to be with you again. And we've got a great guest, a great interview today. Michael Alden is with us, who I happened to hear on a podcast a number of months ago. And I said, man, oh man, this guy is sharp. He had a book coming out called Blueprint to Business, which I immediately pre-ordered on Amazon. I've read it a number of times. And I'm happy to have him with us today. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is great. So let's talk a little bit. I'm very excited and looking forward to getting into this book because I think it's a book that if you're in sales, if you're in business, if you want to succeed in life, you need to have this book and you need to listen to what Michael has to say because he's had a number of great successes, but it's also not an easy road. And he talks very candidly about what you might encounter and how to overcome those obstacles. And we'll get into that. But I'd love to learn a little bit about your kind of early career in business, how you got started. And if there was ever a time where, you had this aha moment or a switch flipped on that said, hey, I've got to, I want to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, it dates back to my childhood, kind of the way I grew up. You hear it a lot, I grew up surrounded by crime, drugs, violence. My mother is HIV positive. My stepfather died of AIDS. My father was addicted to coke. One of my brothers did time in prison for distribution. A kid I grew up with was in jail for life for murder. I wasn't really the best kid growing up in the projects. I remember going to elementary school, middle school, and high school and standing in the separate line because my lunch was subsidized by the state, and I remember we're from Boston, and I remember a cold New England mornings, and we would wake up. One morning, my mom, we woke up and she said, "Hey, go outside and warm up the car." It was this old beat up Dodge Colt. And I went outside to go warm her up, and the car wasn't there. And it wasn't there because it was stolen, which is the neighborhood we grew up in, which is definitely possible. It was because it was repossessed. So, growing up poor, in my first book, Ask More, Get More, is one of the first lines I say. I says, I thank God I grew up poor. Growing up poor is actually not a bad thing. It's actually a great thing depending on how you look at it. So for me, it always drove me to want more because I needed more, And then sometimes I went down the wrong path as well as a result of that. When you're a kid growing up in the projects and you need things, sometimes you don't necessarily do the right thing. But I was that kid on a winter day when it snowed out, when we didn't have school. I was shoveling driveways till 7 o'clock at night until I couldn't move anymore. I was still having fun and having snowball fights and things like that. But I was able to say, hey, you know what? If it's snowing today, I could go out and make $150 in like 1988, which is a lot of money back then. It's a lot of money any day. It's still a lot of money if you're broke. On hot summer days, I was had lemonade stands and we literally franchised them. We had different lemonade stands in different areas on hot summer days. I had a paper route. I had a lawn care business from a lawnmower that I literally took that I found in the trash. And I'm not a very mechanically inclined guy. My next door neighbor, who I'm still close with to this day, we lived in like a duplex. I'm very close with his son, Lonnie. In fact, Lonnie is actually in my book. So I was able to figure things out because I had to. If I wanted that G.I. Joe, if I wanted the nice baseball glove, my first bike, I tell the story in Ask More, Get More. My first bike I bought by collecting cans out of trash containers and going trash picking. My uncle helped me out a little bit too, but so I kind of was just born into it because I had to. And it's such a great gift because you can look at it either way. You can say, man, this really sucks the way I grew up, and you could just stay there. And I was just talking to actually Steve Paris, who was in our studio right now, and we were talking about this yesterday. This whole thing of like, don't forget where you came from. People always say, don't forget where you came from. And I started to kind of question that. I'm like, well, why do I have to remember where I came from? And we were kind of having this philosophical, discussion about it. It's like, be humble. But just because you grew up in the projects doesn't mean you need to stay in the projects.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's a great example of, are you going to let your circumstances define you, or are you going to take control of your life, and get out there and, set goals and try to achieve something. So, thinking about that, what would you tell somebody that didn't have, a tough upbringing, that had everything kind of handed to them, and got used to, many of us live in affluent neighborhoods today, right. And we see there's a whole different way of raising kids than, when we were kids. And,
right.
and A lot of kids grow up and they have things and they expect things. So how, what advice can you give them? How could they get that, that desire to achieve success like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing that people really need to understand is that it's not just going to happen. I think a lot of people, and I have friends, I'm here sitting in my home in Beverly, Massachusetts, where in the same projects I grew up in, I'm in a private neighborhood. It's literally steps away from the beach, and it's a great place. And I think about that same question about how my daughter is going to grow up, So, but the challenge is that even the kids that I grew up with that did have everything, they had everything. And I remember coming to these very neighborhoods. This one's a brand new neighborhood, but I remember coming to these neighborhoods and saying, man, I want that stuff, And those kids in a way were given, great opportunities. And it's really sad to me that most of those kids, they're not doing anything in life. I was supposed to be dead or in jail, when I was 17 years old. And I far surpassed anything that these guys will ever even do in their life. So it saddens me that they kind of grew up with it. So what do you do? Well, here's the thing. You have to understand it's not just going to happen. Just because you grew up in an entitled area, just like I said when I grew up in the projects, doesn't mean it's going to be given to you. You have to work for it. Those people that, where you hear about, like their parents might have passed on their business and then, they're just kind of like barely making it. The ones that really that you really look up to are the ones that the parents pass on the business and then they do something with it, or they grow it, or they innovate the different businesses. So you need to understand that it's not just going to happen. You're not entitled to it. The world is not going to give you what you think you're entitled to. And by the way, it will never happen, ever, unless you actually do something about it. And I still have friends that are still waiting, because they feel as though they are entitled, because they went to a better college than I did, because they grew up in a better neighborhood than I did, because their parents were members at a private country club and I wasn't, and they feel as though that they should just be given this stuff. And I say to you, that's fucking bullshit. I swear a lot of them from Boston. That's just the way that is not the way to think. Just because you grew up in an area, or because maybe you're 99% of the population is smarter than me. What's the difference between me and them? I go out and get it. And you have to understand that. You have to go out and get it. But you also have to understand, because these kids that grew up like that, and it's happening more so now than it even did then, they don't experience failure. They don't experience what it's like, to be down and out. I'll give you an example. So, right now, my business life, well, within the past 8 months, post Blueprinted Business, has continued to actually become more and more challenging, to the point where I felt as though that I was almost going to go out of business. Now, my company's generated hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's like a really sad proposition. And my daughter listens to me. And all these conversations that I'm having when I'm on the phone, I'm picking her up, I'm driving her to school, I'm driving her to soccer practice, and I have these conversations with her. And so just recently she said to me, Daddy, we haven't gone on vacation in a couple of years. And she said, well, everybody else is going on vacation. And I said, well, honey, I'm right now business isn't so hot. I told her that, I told my 11, 12-year-old little girl that. And I said, I tell you what, here's the deal. I had a big deal that I had to close in order to basically stay in business. And I told her exactly what it was. I said, honey, if I close this deal, then we'll go to Florida. Now, I didn't want to necessarily go to Florida. And not only that, I booked it last minute, which was the price was probably double than what it should have been. But I even purposefully picked flights that weren't really the best flights. I could have picked a direct flight and paid almost double that, but I also wanted her to see that. I wanted her to recognize that, hey, we're going to Florida for 4 or 5 days and it's going to cost us like $6,000. And I tell her that. And by the way, we're only going because you want to go. And, she deserves it. She's actually a hardworking kid. Her grades are great. But I wanted her to recognize that. I want her to see that. So a lot of people that are raising kids right now feel as though that they want to keep their kids out of, kind of the real world stuff. I say, no, let them in on it. Don't stress them out to the point where, like, hey, we're not going to be able to pay, buy you a soccer ball because, daddy's, bankrupt.
Right.
But let them know what's going on, because it clicks with them. They remember that stuff, and they'll remember it long term. And they say, oh yeah, you know what? When my daughter, when we go into, and by the way, I spoil her too. Every parent does that stuff. But like sometimes when we go into a store, I literally put her on our budget. And so, you want to buy something? You have $50. And she'll come back to me, and I said, by the way, and you got to include taxes. What's the tax rate in Florida? What's it? It's 6.2% here. I think it's 6% down there. So she's doing that math. And so it's an exercise. So what do I say to those people is, you need to recognize where you're at. And you also need to understand that it's not just going to happen. You have to work for it. That's just basic stuff. That's why all my books are so basic.
Yeah.
It's simple stuff,
No, it's true, but it's just not being taught in school, and it's not really a common practice among parents. And it's so funny you say that story because I did the same with my kids. My kids are a little bit older; they're now in the business world. But my wife used to say, "Hey, you tell them too much. You know, you're bringing them in on issues," and I'm like, I want them to know.
Right.
You know, I want them to know if I have a challenge, and I want them to see me figure it out or not figure it out, and let them start to build some of these skills. And I told my one son, you know, he's an aspiring sports play-by-play guy, and you know, he was doing a lot of networking. And I said to him, I said, you know, people are going to be more open to speaking to you when you're a student, you know, and when you become that, you know, person that's out there competing for a job, it might get more difficult. And he was kind of like, you know, but shit, it really did. You know, once he got out there, it became really, really difficult, and he's still working on it. I mean, he's got a couple of great gigs, but you know, it's just so important. I agree with you so much, Michael. I just feel like we're doing our kids a disservice. We're doing this whole generation a disservice if we don't, you know, educate them on what real life is really like. You know, I know you like Gary Vee like I do, and he talks about the 8th place trophies. You know, everybody gets a trophy, everybody's a winner, but life isn't really like that.
Well, I mean, I have a whole section of my book called "Stop Lying to Your Children." You know, in a book about business, you know, and it's, yeah, that's a real problem. You got to stop lying to your children. You got to let them know what's going on. Don't, you know, don't coddle them to the point. See, here's the thing is if you do that, if you put your kid in a bubble and you feel as though that they're never going to be in harm's way, which, you know, it's just a parental instinct, I think, you're actually doing them a disservice. You do need to let them in on stuff. You also have to be, you know, judicious on how you do it, right? You don't want to just let them know about every single little detail. But like I taught my daughter knows, you know, things like, oh, hey, daddy, so let me ask you a question. You know, so that guy you were talking to, so you're going to buy something from him, right? Yeah. And you're going to sell it to somebody else for more? I go, yeah, it's exactly what I'm doing. You know, so she hears that stuff and she starts to think about it, and her mind starts to, you know, click, especially, you know, at this young age. It's basic physiology. Their brains are a sponge, and they're going to continue to grow. And what you decide you're going to put in there is what is going to help them long term.
Yeah, so true. So you had these early businesses kind of in your, you know, younger years. What was the first business that was actually something that kind of took off for you?
Yeah, so my first one, as I talk about it in pretty much all my books, is a product called Zeus Juice. It's a frozen popsicle with booze in it. And it was one of those ideas that I was in college. We're doing shots in college. We had nothing to mix it with, and we started chasing it with flavor ice. And I came home. It was 1997. I came home, and I said, man, I wonder if I could get this to freeze. And everyone's like, alcohol doesn't freeze. I knew nothing. I went and I bought a chemistry kit at Toys R Us. That's right, because that's the only place I knew where to buy them, which, you know, they're out of business soon or on their way. And I just started mixing flavor ice with alcohol and just trying to figure out how to see if I could get it to freeze. Went through that whole process, figured it out, started showing people, and they're like, wow, this is a great idea. So I'm in my early 20s. I was selling cars at the time, and, you know, I just didn't ever want to be one of those guys, and I call it if I had only syndrome. I probably learned that from Zig Ziglar or somebody else, I forget. But, you know, it's, you know, I knew I was young enough that if it didn't work, I could recover. And that's exactly what happened. I launched the business. We had some great success in the beginning. It was hard. It was brutal. It was fun. It was a very expensive learning experience. It ultimately caused me to declare bankruptcy. I was in law school. I needed to make a decision whether or not I was going to continue to run that business or I was going to finish law school. I chose law school. And then I relaunched it in 2013, I think. And we had a little bit more success with it. But ultimately, you know, when you look at all the different businesses that I'm in, it just didn't make sense to continue to run that business. And so, you know, we shut it down. So that was really the big one. And it was brutal, man. I mean, there were days and this is the stuff that I think that, you know, Gary Vee talks about this, but, you know, I still think that he's not even as honest as I am in my book. You know, there were days where, you know, I would literally just on a hot summer day when I should be selling this stuff, I would stay at home laying on the couch doing nothing because I was physically and emotionally and mentally just crippled because it just wasn't working and it hurt and I was broke and I didn't know what to do. And then the next day I pull myself up and I would go out and make some sales, and then you try and get some momentum. So that's what it's like, you know, as an entrepreneur. It really is not easy. And you know what? And Gary Vee has said stuff like this. It's not for everybody. You know, the entrepreneurial lifestyle isn't for everybody. Doesn't mean you can't work in an entrepreneurial, business.
Hmm.
But, you know, at the end of the day, I tell all my executives, at the end of the day, you know, if my business were to fail, the only one that's left standing, if I'm even still standing, the only one that's left to answer for any sort of liabilities is me. And that's an awesome responsibility, especially when you have, you know, people that depend on you. So it's an awesome responsibility. It's a great thing as well as far as freedom. I'm sitting here in my home. You know, I didn't go into the office and do this, although Steve, our producer, is actually in our studio right now, probably listening to it as well. And I have that freedom. And so to me, money is important to live. Money's never been anything that's something that really drives me. The freedom is really kind of the most important thing. But for me, I also love building things, right? That as an entrepreneur, you got to just go. A lot of people say, Mike, you know, when's it ever going to be enough? I'm like, well, what do you mean? You know, the material things, that's not it. It's never going to be enough. I have a friend of mine whose father is he just had his 83rd birthday, and he's a prominent lawyer here in my hometown. He's not retired. He could. He's got a beautiful house, bigger than mine, actually on the water here in Beverly. But he's not going to retire because it's not a job to him. He loves it. This is what he does.
Exactly.
I mean, it's you know, once you find that, you're a pretty lucky person.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, I talked to a bunch of my friends, and it's like the notion of retirement to us, it just doesn't exist. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's not the old days. It's not getting the gold watch and shutting it down and, you know, going to play golf. I mean, it depends on, I guess, your perspective. But
Right.
for me, I just want to keep going and adding value as long as I breathe. You know what I mean? And I guess it's a personality thing. So did you ever consider just being like a lawyer, an attorney? Or was
Oh
that
yeah, no, I was. I was. So I practiced law for almost 10 years.
Okay.
And so right out of law school, so I declared bankruptcy in, let's see, what year are we? 2018. So it was like 15 years ago, maybe longer than that. So maybe like in the year 2000, I think. Something similar. I was in law school. I needed a job. I was broke, and I found a call center in my local town in Beverly that was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I went to law school nights, so I needed that flexibility to be able to come in and out. And it was a great job. I had a sales background. I had, you know, I had sold cars for a little while. I was a recruiter, so I understood sales. And to me, it was easy. Calls were just coming in to this call center. And I excelled at it. I ultimately passed the bar exam, and then I became their in-house lawyer for about 5 years. And then I still remain active, you know. But I now have a lawyer that works for me. They say a lawyer who represents himself as a fool for a client. So I did practice law, and I loved it. I love the law. I love everything about it. I love the mental aspect of it. The way we're trained, you know, we think differently. I think a lot differently than most people, and it's something that you can only get if you go through law school.
Yeah, and they take you through that a little bit on the LSAT, which I unfortunately didn't do too well with. So that was kind of.
Oh, are you an attorney?
No, I'm not.
But you took the LSAT. Okay.
I took the LSAT. I was a paralegal for about right out of college for about 7 or 8 months while I was thinking about law school. And then I didn't do that great on the LSAT, and I was working in a corporate firm, and I said, God, these guys are all insane. You know, I just saw them, and I'm like, I don't think I want to be like these guys. So I wound up going into.
Well, that lifestyle, working in a law firm, is definitely for a special person. You know, I didn't do well on the LSATs either. I scored a 145 twice on the LSAT, which is low 30th percentile. I got the exact same score twice, which actually technically brought me down. And I felt as though that it was over for me. I'm like, I'm not going to be. I graduated with a 3.0, exactly a 3.0. I had a lot of great things in college. I was class president. I played football. I had all these other things. But law school, they say that matters, but not really. And I was fortunate enough to. By the way, when you talk about it's not just going to happen. So I graduated with a 3.0. I had a low 30th percentile LSAT score, and you know, law school, medical school. You know, those are probably the top two as far as, you know, competition is concerned.
Sure.
And it's not easy. And so I did everything I possibly could to get into law school, above and beyond anything that anybody would have ever done. I went out and I leveraged every relationship I had, which wasn't many. I talked to every person I knew about what I need to do in order to get into law school. And then, you know, I applied to a few different law schools. I got into a couple, and then I got into Suffolk Law, which is a, you know, fairly decent school here in Boston.
Yeah, I remember that one.
And it was one of those things where if I hadn't have pushed that hard, if I hadn't have asked for more out of others, then it would have never happened. And then I got in, I graduated with honors, top half of my class. And I was on the dean's list, 3 out of the 4 years, and the rest is history. But that low LSAT score, I had the same thing. And by the way, the bar exam, I get to the bar exam, I missed the bar exam by 1 question.
Oh God.
And everyone always says, well, that's okay. JFK, he took him 5 times. That doesn't make you feel any better.
No.
I missed the bar exam by 1 question. And here's I tell people, and I learned this from Zig Ziglar, that I never failed at anything. I just didn't pass. He calls them temporary defeats.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
You've kind of taken that, from him as well. And when you don't pass the bar exam and you get that letter 6 months later after taking a 2-day exam, and it says we regret to inform, I have that hanging up in my office to remind me. It hurts. But here's the thing: I didn't pass because I didn't prepare. I only studied for like 2 weeks. The second time around, I studied for 13 weeks straight. I took 1 day off, 10 hours a day, every single day. When I went in the second time, I knew more about the law than anybody possibly could, and I crushed it. Here's the crazy thing. When you pass the bar exam, you don't get your score. But I knew going in after day 1 that if I hadn't even showed up on day 2, I probably still would have passed. And so it all came down to preparation. It all came down to me ultimately saying, all right, do I really want this? Am I really going to put in the time? Look, you graduated law school. A bunch of other people graduated law school as well. So now it's this next step. I have friends that when I went to law school that didn't take the bar exam. It blows my mind. Like, why did you go through this hell of not, of not at least, taking that step? You know why? Because they were afraid. Because they were afraid of failure. I'm like, dude, I have a close friend. I'm like, and I joke around with him now. It's too late. I mean, he's not taking it now. He's actually pretty successful. But I'm like, man, you could quadruple your income if you actually had your JD. Well, he has your JD, but if you actually had your license, so.
No, it's incredible, and so many good lessons in there. I mean, you could have just given up after the LSAT and said, "Oh, I'm not cut out for this," but you kept.
I almost did, man. I remember where I was when it happened. I was in by then we had moved out of the project, so in this tiny little seasonal home in Danvers, Massachusetts, on the Danvers River, and I was in my bedroom was literally like you could just fit a queen size bed in it. That was it. And I remember talking to a friend of mine's sister who actually happened to be an attorney at Reebok, and and she was kind of talking me off the ledge. She's like, Mike, it's okay. You'll be all right. You're going to take it again. You'll be good, and then I took it again and I got to 145 again. But by then I was just determined, I was like, I am going to go to law school. And whether it was Suffolk or another, I actually got into a couple other law schools, but Suffolk was the place I really wanted to go. It has a great name, great reputation. Yep. Ultimately that's where I went.
No, it's great. Great story. So let's talk a little bit about your latest book, which is called Blueprint to Business, which is a great book. If you guys haven't picked it up, you need to, because it's fantastic. And I've highlighted it and I've put notes in the margins and I look at it frequently to keep myself going. So when did the idea first come to you to write the book? And then how long did it take to pull it together?
It's an interesting question. So my first book, Ask More, Get More, I kind of had an idea for that. So we went through that and that book did really, really well. Second book, 5% More, same thing. Actually, not same thing. I didn't have an idea for that book as well. And, I've told that story a million times on how that came to me. And then Blueprint to Business came to me. It's an interesting story. So I have a production studio where Steve is sitting over there right now. It's literally down the street. It's a television and radio studio. And I had a mentor of mine, come down, and he was just checking it out, and he says, what are you doing with this radio studio? And I said, nothing. And he's like, well, what do you use it for? I said, well, we use it to do like voiceover stuff. It's not like super high end, but it does the trick, and it's nice, and we got soundboards and all the equipment that we need, and a nice microphone like the one you're using. And he said, you should just start a podcast. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm like, it's just, start a podcast, start interviewing local entrepreneurs, start getting some content out there, start to help build your brand of Michael Alden. And I said, hey, that's a good idea. So I started doing that, and I felt as though I had some quality information I could share with people. So that book, Blueprint to Business, started out as me just one-on-one in the studio riffing about certain subjects that I felt passionate about. And that, took some time. And then, I said, man, I wonder I wonder if we could put this in book format. Now, I had already had a 2-book deal with Wiley and Son, so I had a second book I had to fulfill anyway, or if I was going to fulfill one. And, we put it in book format, edited it, cleaned it up a little bit. I sent it to my editor that I had work on my first 2 books, and asked him what he thought about it. He says, well, it's raw, man. It's really raw. It needs a lot of work, but I think those subjects are valuable, and I don't think there's really anything out there as honest as your book. And so let's go through the process. So we went through the process, cleaned it up, sent it to Wiley and Sons, and they said, yeah, we like it. In fact, they wanted a fast track that we slowed it down a little bit because it still needed a little more massaging because, it's generally a 1 to 2 year process from start to finish, to write a decent book, that's edited properly and things like that. So, that's how we came to it. And I'm like, wow, you know what, this is some valuable information because it's honest, man. It's real. Yeah. I'm tired of the guys that are out there that are, showing how successful they are and showing their rented Ferraris and Lambos, and they're on Instagram and they're passing out $100 bills and they're in rented mansions, and then they have jets with their logos on them, but it's not even really theirs. I'm tired of that stuff, man. You know what I mean? Let's talk about the real stuff. So do I have great things? Is my life, quote, more fairly successful than I guess most people? Sure, maybe. But also at the same time, I'm just like everybody else. I'm not sitting on millions of dollars in the bank. Someday that's kind of like what I'm working towards. But at the same time, you have to understand that, Gary Vee has said this, and I had Les Brown on my podcast, and he said, it's the struggle that creates life. And once you realize that it really is the struggle, and you become comfortable with the fact that it's never going to be easy. It might get easier. It's just never going to be easy, and you're comfortable with that and you understand that, then it becomes easier because all right, well, I'm going to have to deal with this. I'm going to have to deal with this roadblock. Like, right now my business life is still, again, a little bit of, chaotic. And it's like every step of the way, I tell people, I feel like I'm getting kicked in the nuts every 2 minutes. And but I'm like, all right, so I got smart and I put a couple on, and I'm like, all right, so how do I anticipate this, or what's this? In my book, Blueprint to Business, I talk about worst case scenario.
Yeah, I love that.
I say, look, and a lot of people don't like to talk about that. And this is probably, I learned this as being a lawyer. And I say, look, what is the worst case scenario? And can you live with that? And if you can live with that, then going from there, everything else is gravy. And so that's how I've had to take chapters and sections out of my own book to say, all right, my business is in complete disarray right now from things that are outside of my, control. And what can I do in order to fix it? And so I need to go to some people that I owe money to and say, hey, look, I can't pay you right now. And they say, well, whoa, what? You realize that like I had one, and they realize, we have a personal guarantee for $200,000, against you personally. I said, yeah, I do understand that. I go, let's talk about what will happen. You're gonna sue me? You're gonna sue my company? And then you're gonna come after me for $200,000? I said, well, good luck, because I'm an attorney. My whole life is set up in a way that I don't own anything. I'm honest with you. You know what I mean? Go ahead and sue me and get a $200,000 judgment against me. Or let's work through it. Let's talk about where I'm at. I've been doing business with you for almost 10 years. Let's figure it out together, because as a lawyer, I know that nobody ever wins. I've been involved in high stakes litigation a lot. Nobody ever wins, including the plaintiff. So, let's just try and figure it out. And then once you can have that honest conversation and then be comfortable with the worst case scenario, it's amazing what happens. I was literally in a position where I had no leverage, but you create leverage by letting people know that you're okay with whatever happens.
No, I love that, and it's almost, it's therapeutic, it's releasing the fear when you go to the absolute worst thing that can happen and talk it through, talk it out with somebody, and then just embrace it. And then suddenly you're like, okay, it's like the what the fuck moment from, right?
From Risky Business. I talk about that in the book. I mean, yeah, it's and also have that conversation with your adversaries. I told my daughter, and I've told people this. I mean, some of my closest friends, in high school, I met in a brawl. So a lot of times your adversaries can become your friends because you're able to have that open and honest, candid conversation. And by the way, it doesn't feel good. No. Especially if you really don't have any leverage. It doesn't feel good to go to someone and say, hey, look, this happened and, it just kind of caught me off guard. Or even if you made a mistake, But having that conversation, like you said, is therapeutic. You know, I've gone to therapy most of the time throughout my life, but, you know, talking to people and talking through it it is cathartic. It does make you feel better. And your brain starts to say, okay, well, how can I figure this out? Because there always is a solution. And by the way, it is extremely difficult to think like this when you're going through it. When you're in hell, it's very, very hard to say, oh, well, everything's great. Everything's fabulous.
Yeah,
you know? And I did learn from Ziegler and these other guys. Like, I always tell people, look, I'm terrific. I'm fantastic, even when I'm not. But then sometimes, you know, you just got to be honest with yourself and say, all right, well, things aren't great right now. And what can I do to fix it? You know, it's that inner, you know, gut check that you have to have, and also say, you know, well, where am I really right now? Rather than posting images of yourself on Instagram and showing people, you know, how great you think your life is, let's do this. I tell people, stop lying on Instagram and Snapchat and Twitter, you know, and posting images of, you know, you go to a jewelry store and you try on a Rolex and then you post a picture of it as if it's yours. I mean, there's all these fucking guys doing this. It drives me nuts. No, look, why don't you work towards actually buying that Rolex? And then if you're really happy about that and you want to show people, then post an image of it. Rather than I just fake it to make it thing drives me crazy. Don't fake it. Don't fake it. Work towards it, you know?
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And, you know, there's a lot of different things about that. Certainly there's, I'm trying to think of the book, The Power of Consistency, Landon. I can't think of his name now, but I did a podcast on him. But it's, you know, if you take personal accountability and say, hey, I fucked this up.
Yep.
You know, I put myself in this position. Then you put yourself in a position to solve the problem, because you're taking the accountability and saying, hey, I got myself here. But the good news is, since I got myself here, I can get myself out. And
yeah, I mean, it's easier to blame everybody else. You know what I mean? It's easy to blame. I mean, I could blame my mother, my father, my brother, my environment. I blame everybody else. I can blame, you know, business things that have happened, you know, to me on others. But I mean, I take full responsibility for everything that's happened to me. And I will say this. I mean, I had recent candid conversations with my executives. And I said, guys, you know, I'm tired of saying that it's on me. Okay. It comes a point where it really is on you. And so the people that work for me, I consider them close friends. And it's really, really hard to draw that line, you know, to say, hey, look, you know what I mean? You fucked this up, man. And you need to fix it. You're my buddy. You're my friend. But I am not going to continue to allow this to happen just because you're my friend, you know. So you, as executives, whether you're in positions, you're in these positions for a reason, you need to step back and say to yourself, what did I do wrong and how can I fix it? You know, so that it never happens again. Because, you know, that's also, so, you know, when you talk about books, I mean, where I tell the story about, you know, outliers in the book Outliers, they talk about Korean Airlines and how, you know, they were the worst airline there was because of lack of communication. Right. So, yeah, it is that inner gut check. It is that, you know, looking inside with yourself and within others and say, man, how can I fix this? How can I make it better? And how can I make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah, so true. So one of the great other things in the book that I love is, you know, if you boil it down, this book is about two things. It's about, to be successful, you need to know what to do, and then you need to go do it. Right. And one of your biggest points is that so many people have the dream, but it doesn't make it into their thinking. And then even worse, it doesn't get it into execution. Right. And I guess, why is that? You know, is it fear? Is it laziness? What do you think it is?
Well, it's a lot of different things, but I mean, I tell people to stop dreaming. I did a whole speech once at a high school for all these at-risk kids, and I got up and my whole speech was telling them to stop dreaming. The teachers were like, their jaws dropped. But then once they understood the message and what I mean by stop dreaming, I said dreaming's for sleeping. I say, rather than dreaming, let's set realistic goals. If you want to have a vision, you know, like I don't call them dream boards. People have dream boards. I call them vision boards. If you want to have a vision for something that you want to be in the future, well, that's fine. Let's do that. Let's think about that. You want to close your eyes and try and, you know, work on the mental side of it, like, you know, professional athletes do, and they try and envision themselves in certain situations so that when they get there, they're prepared. We can do that, right? But let's stop dreaming. Okay, that's the first thing. You want to go to bed at night and dream about, you know, going to Hawaii or whatever just to make yourself feel better, that's fine. But if you want to be the next CEO, if you want to be the president of the United States, if you want to be a multimillionaire, you can't dream about it, because it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's not just going to happen. So the first step is like, all right, so, you know, you are an 18-year-old high school dropout, and, you know, you're working at a grocery store, okay? but you want to be a millionaire. All right, well, what do you need to do? So how are you going to accomplish that? And then you have to start thinking about it, and then you have to do it yourself. I can't answer those questions for you. You got all these coaches out there. They can sit down with you and say, okay, well, what's your passion? You say, oh, well, I'm a singer. Okay, well, I write that down, or I like landscaping, or whatever it is. You have to start to figure out, what direction you want to go in, and that's what a lot of like life coaches try and do. But yeah, you need to actually start doing it. And then it goes back to the philosophy in my first book, second book, 5% More. You have to understand that it's not just going to happen once you're working. You have to take these, what I like to call micro steps or micro moments, and then just compound on those over time, because to go from zero to a millionaire is just not going to happen. But to go from zero to making $100 a week, $200 a week, $500 a week, $1,000 a week, now you're making 50 grand a year. Now you're making 75 grand a year. Like, all right, cool. Right now in 2018, 75 grand a year for even a family of 3 people is, livable, and then it's like, all right, well, what else can I do? How do I get to 100? What do I need to do to get to 100? What do I need to do? So those are the things you need to do. And a lot of people say, well, I'm stuck in a job and this, that, the other thing. Just figure it out. You have to figure it out. If you're people always say, well, I work 60 hours a week. I have a friend who I'm investing with in a restaurant, right? And he says, well, I said, you're gonna have to be there, 70 hours a week. He says, well, yeah, I'm gonna have to work, like 90 hours a week. And if you think about that, that's literally there from 7 in the morning to like 9 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. People who own restaurants really do that. But most people don't even work a legitimate 60 hours a week. Like, I don't even work a legitimate 60 hours a week. When I say that kind of in jest, because I'm always working. But for me, working isn't work, right? So I'm always just kind of in business, always doing my thing. Most people don't want to put in that work. You asked, why is that? People are lazy. They don't want to put in the work. They don't want to get up in the morning, when they're tired, and put in a legitimate 12 hours a day. If they, you talk about consistency. I have a lot of people that are consistently inconsistent. So the only thing they're consistent with is inconsistency. Hey, no. So if you want to be successful, I have sales guys, right? And I look at their sales and I'm like, man, you just made $3 grand this week. Your pace on 150 grand a year. Now let's do this for the next 50 cycles. Then get to the end of the year. You just made 150 grand a year. Just because you made $3,000 this week doesn't make you making 150 grand a year. You need to do that every single. So what did you do? Oh, well, I put my head down. I didn't talk. I didn't go out for cigarette breaks. I didn't, I showed up every single day. I didn't make excuses. I told my wife, listen, honey, I got to come to work today in order for us to put food on the table for our kids. You have to make sacrifices too. People aren't willing to make sacrifices. They're not willing to put in the work, and it's not just going to happen. So what are you going to do? And that's why I say, like, even for myself, and again, man, like, you have to understand, like, when I'm saying this, I'm not preaching to people. This is the stuff I have to give myself a gut check all the time. I wake up in the morning. I have a painting above my fireplace in the bedroom of an artist. We were talking about art earlier. Of an artist. His name is Romero Brito, and it's of the word happy. Because I need to remind myself that I need to be happy every single day. Happiness doesn't just happen. That's what people understand. You got to work at it. So everything is work. So look, man, if you want something, you just have to go out and start doing it. And it's so cliche-ish, and it just sounds so simple. But what really saddens me is people watching right now, and hopefully we're getting across to some people, and as soon as they're done watching this podcast, they may go out tomorrow or this afternoon or whatever and start doing stuff. But it is that consistency. You have to do it over time. And how do you do that? You do it gradually. You don't just jump into it and say, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to do this. No. There's a great book called The 10% Entrepreneur. I had him on my podcast, and he says, look, you can start gradually over time, right? And just start to get into the business. If you're if you're working at a call center like mine, and you want to be an artist, or you want to start a t-shirt company, that's fine. Start it on the weekends, start it at night, and then you get to the point where it actually is generating revenue, generating income for you. Then you're ready to make that leap. Don't just jump into it. You got time. You know what I mean? You got time, but you have to work at it.
Yeah, it's so true, and it's like, every day, maybe you just in baseball, you get a couple of more hits. It's not always hitting a home run. It's not always a grand slam.
It's Moneyball. I mean, it's movie Moneyball. I mean, it's why the Red Sox won the World Series. You know what I mean? It's not about getting up and hitting home runs. It's about getting up and being consistent.
having that batting average, over the course of time. And I guess, one of the things that slows us down is, when difficult things come up and challenges. And in the book, you talk about, failure. And that you really say that failure for you doesn't exist. It's really it's a setback and not a failure. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I learned that from Zig Ziglar. I was really fortunate enough to actually meet him. I went to the 29th anniversary of his 51st birthday, which is his 80th birthday. And, I've had dinner with him. We actually did we did an infomercial with him back in the day, and he's, hanging out with him for sales guys, is like being around like a deity, so, I read a lot, I have right on my desk right here, just reaching over, Norman Vincent Peale. I didn't read this until last year. This right here, The Law of Success. This is the original version of The Law of Success. Some people read the Bible every day. I have these right here. If you could see my desk, I have, different, quotes and things like that, to remind myself, to fight through it. When I'm dealing with a tough time, a lot of times I'll just literally just open up a part of The Law of Success and just start reading it to remind myself of some of the things that I need to do. Same thing with Norman Vincent Peale. Again, I didn't read this until last year. I can't believe it. It's such a great book, but positive thinking is not the end all be all. That's the other thing too. I can be as positive as I want, but you actually got to do stuff. That's why I like The Law of Success, and I talk about The Law of Success in pretty much all of my books. So yeah, failure, man. Once you start to realize and start to say to yourself that failure is temporary, I don't like to call it failure. I call them temporary defeats. Again, I learned that from Zig Ziglar, and you can recognize. It's funny. I just had a guy reach out to me. He says, Mike, I've read your book, Blueprint to Business. I love it. He says, you have a contradictory statement in Blueprint to Business about failure. And I was like, oh shit, did I really? And I went back and I said, where? You show me where? And I think he said on page 187. I got pulled up. He was wrong. I just used the word failure in there, but I didn't use it in the context that I used it. I just talked about. So, and so when you think about it, I was telling someone this recently. 99% of the things that I do don't work. And if you want to call them a failure, that's fine. But I think it's that failure is fatal. So, I have a vodka right here. So there's a vodka. It's called. I'm not promoting it, but it just happened to be here on my desk. It's called Emery Vodka. We had a lot of success with it, but because of other business challenges, I've essentially had to kind of shut it down, and that hurts, man, because I put a lot of sweat equity and a lot of cash involved in that. I launched the daily fantasy sports company. I think I talk about that in Blueprint to Business. I had to sell that. I launched a network marketing company, which is in Blueprint to Business, called Cloisonne. I had to essentially kind of shut that down. And if I looked at those as failures, I'd probably end up in a mental institution because I would just feel like just a subhuman. But as an entrepreneur, as a business person, as someone who's just on this planet living, you need to understand, man, that's just the way it is. And it doesn't feel good. So, if anybody's going to tell you that I had these sales guys, you're in sales, I love these sales guys. I love it when someone says no. And I say, well, why? And they say, well, because I'm so much closer to a yes. You don't love the no's. Nobody loves the no's.
Horrible. Right.
You just know that it's going to happen. Okay. So that's good to mentally prepare yourself so you can have that mental fortitude to get through it. That's okay. So don't look at the things that you're doing as a failure. And also don't be afraid. I mean, there's all these memes and all these other people say it. And again, I'm just honest with people when I say most of the things that I do don't work. And by the way, that's really hard too when I'm trying to present things to like my executive team. So for instance, my network marketing company, Cloisonne, we put a significant amount of money, time, resources in it. And we had some catastrophic things happen that essentially forced us to kind of shut it down. And that really sucks because I felt as though what we're doing, I think my team finally bought into it too, that what we were doing was really kind of cool. But ultimately we had to kind of shut it down. But that led into other things. Now I'm in the world of cryptocurrency, right? So I have a mining operation. I have another book called Crushing Crypto. We have an infomercial right now on TV about my book, Crushing Crypto. And if those things didn't happen, if those temporary defeats didn't happen, then I wouldn't be here today. If I had passed the bar exam the first time, I was thinking about this in the shower today. If I had passed the bar exam the first time, I would have left that call center that I was working at and went to go work at a law firm because I actually had an offer at another firm. My life would be completely different. So those temporary defeats, a lot of people call them failures. You just got to recognize that there's a reason why it happens, and they open up other doors. Again, really hard to see when it's happening. And, when I several months ago, when I was dealing with just, absolute chaos in my business, I I wanted to check out, not out on the planet, but I just wanted to check out of the business. I was done. I was like, you know what, man, I want to go drive an Uber. I don't want to deal with the stress anymore, because it gets to you. Like, we're all human. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people just don't talk about. It's not easy, man. It's not easy being an entrepreneur. It's not easy being a parent. It's not easy being just working in your work-a-day world. But once you can kind of get comfortable with that and say, all right, man, you know what? I'm going to get hit with speed bumps. Some people say, well, that's kind of a negative way to think. I don't think it's a negative way to think. I think it's just being prepared mentally so that you can, work through it. And then there's all these other things you can do, which I talk about in 5% More and Ask More, Get More. Physically getting yourself prepared for it. I was at the gym this morning. I meditate twice a day, not twice a day every day, but I'm a practitioner of TM. And so there are things that you need to do for your own brain so that you can get through it, because it's just not easy.
So true. So true. And that's what I think the greatest thing about it. It's just the honesty about it. You mentioned the struggle before. There's that great book by Brendan Burchard, High Performance Habits, where he talks about, what are these, super successful people doing? They embrace the struggle. They know it's going to be there, and they don't fall apart when it happens. And in the digital world today, so much changes, and you're just describing how you've adapted, right? Like we have to adapt. There's going to be a new freaking challenge every day thrown at us, a new distribution channel, a new way to buy things. Now you're into crypto, and just staying cutting edge. So, talking about sales, and this is obviously sales is king. A lot has changed on how we, buy and sell things. What's your opinion of how sales has changed over the last few years?
Well, I think consumers are if they're smart, are much more educated, so, which is a good thing as a salesperson. When I sold cars, I was in 97, from like 97 to 99. And the internet, believe it or not, is still relatively new. So people started to come in with the invoice, and it was shocking to us, and the numbers were right. I'm like, whoa, these people actually know this. So now they're becoming more educated. So again, it's you're going to have to be able to adapt. So, I don't think the fundamentals of sales really is changing. You need to build rapport with people. You need to offer a good service. You need to offer good value to people. You need to be able to, I tell people this, when I buy things from people, I said, I need two things. I want a product that works, and I want good customer service. So if you can do those two things, I sit in rooms all the time where guys are pitching me stuff and they want to sell me software, or they want to sell me this, that, the other thing. And it looks amazing. And it's just, they put on these great dog and pony shows, but then when it comes down to actually performing, most of them do, in fact, fail. Temporary defeats, right? So that's it. When you're in sales, you got to provide those two things: a product that works and good customer service, and then everything else just kind of works, because then those customers will buy other things from you, and it becomes a lot easier. It becomes more of a relationship. And that's why when I mentioned, the crypto thing, we're starting to have a one-on-one, peer-to-peer, more symbiotic relationship with our customers, where we're able to, they're able to pay us in cryptocurrency, and because they're comfortable with us, and they've been doing business with us, like, or they're buying my other things, because like, oh, we bought his other stuff, and you know what, it worked for us, and by the way, it's not always going to work. You're going to sell people stuff that isn't going to work. So what are you going to do? That's when you provide the good customer service. I grew up in this business in customer service, taking customer service calls. When I said I was in that call center, that's where I first started. So, I think the fundamentals, and here's one thing that I definitely know will never change in sales, ever, regardless of the technology, ever. We are always going to be buying things, and we're always going to be selling things. It's just all that depends on which side you're on and how you're doing it. So that will never, ever change unless we somehow become cyborgs or something. And, so I say never, but I mean,
Oh, man. So good. So I know we're getting close to the end. Just a couple of final questions. So who do you look up to today? Who do you go to for advice? Who's out there that's, role models for you?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of role models, man. And, it's more about personal mentors, people that I've done business with. I have a couple people that I've done business with throughout the years that have literally saved me, that know more than me, that have seen a lot more than me, that are battle tested. And sometimes you have to suck up your pride and go to them and say, the guy who I mentioned about the podcast, his name is Charles Parisi. I owed him, almost $1 million at one point, and he talked me through it and showed me how to get out of it. I owed him $1 million, and he showed me how to get out of it. He didn't come to me and say, you owe me a fucking $1 million. I'm gonna break you. He said, Mike, let's figure this out. And I learned that from him. I'm like, all right, so if I owe people money, I go to them and say, let's solve this problem. So, as far as people that are out there, I mean, I do think Gary Vee is pretty cool. I mean, I think for the most part, he's as honest as it gets. I've met Gary. I went to an event with him, a wine tasting event, and we're the exact same age. I think his hustle is real. I think, Grant Cardone. I think there's, and I say this with all sincerity and no disrespect. I think there's a lot of materialistic things in the Grant Cardone world that people, want that are it's just not achievable for most people. But I think his hustle is real. I think his story is real. I can text Grant. I was on his show, Power Players, and I've seen some of the things that he's done. So it's pretty. So those two guys. So, but as far as looking up, I think the challenge with that is that we get let down too many times, because you just never really know what's going on in this world. You got guys like Ty Lopez too that are out there that seems to be doing some really cool stuff, but there's a lot of kind of like, maybe there's like smoke and mirrors. You're not really sure. I mean, he's got to be doing something right, because seems to have all this great material things, what I mean? So, looking up to people is one thing, trying to emulate people, but I say to people, rather than trying to find those heroes, it's like Charles Barkley said, I'm not a role model, try and find somebody that's in your business. Like you mentioned your son earlier, go to Brent Musburger or whoever, and you know what I mean? Say, hey, look, I need help. That's the one thing that I found is probably the best thing is when I first started practicing law, I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't have mentors. And so I went to this attorney that was representing my old company, and I called him up. I introduced myself, and I said, look, man, I said, I need a mentor. And they kind of teach you that in law school. Like, just, you need to like buddy up with somebody. So and he didn't know me from a hole in the wall, but they people that are more successful than you, that have done it before, they're open to helping you. I talked about my Zeus Juice story, how I launched that product not knowing anything about the liquor business. I went to this guy, his name was Ray Bird. He started a company called Tudors. They were these test tube things down in Florida, and my product kind of competed with his. And I reached out to him. I just told him what I was trying to do. And he spent hours and hours and hours and hours with me, showing me how to do it, because that's what successful people do. So don't necessarily try and look towards a celebrity, or even these, Instagram or Facebook, or Snapchat type celebrities. Take a look at who's in your industry, and reach out to them and say, man, I'd love to just pick your brain. I'd love to just talk with you. Maybe you can show me some things. What do you think about this? And they'll talk, and they'll give you information, and they'll talk sometimes for hours.
Yeah, so true. And that's one of your other points in here, that success can be duplicated. Right. So there are plenty of people that might be doing what you want to do. Go find those people and go ask them how they did it, and go do it.
Yeah, and go do it. And it's like, and you know what? And they won't be offended.
No.
You know what I mean? Because what I'm doing now is essentially what my old company did when I was representing them. I'm just doing it better. And you learn from people's mistakes. You learn from their successes. You maybe can improve upon those. You take the bad things, you throw those things out. You adapt as time changes, and then you move forward. So yeah, rather than trying to recreate the wheel, which I think a lot of people are trying to do, there's a slogan. They say pioneering doesn't pay. It has for guys like Elon Musk and others. If you have an idea, take a look and see if someone else is doing it. Like I had mentioned, I'm in the crypto world now, and in the blockchain world now. And so we're looking at doing some stuff within the blockchain world, and we're doing a lot of research to try and see, hey, here's our idea. Are there other people doing it? And the first question is yes, or excuse me, the first answer to that is yes, which is a great thing. It means there's a market, right? And then you say, okay, well, what are they doing? Is it the same? Can we improve upon that? Maybe we can reach out to them. Maybe we could partner with them. So, there's all these different things you can go through, when you're trying to, innovate. You can innovate without recreating the wheel. Success 100% can be duplicated.
So true. And then lastly, tell us a little bit about your podcast, and what do you think of podcasting in general?
So my podcast is called The Alden Report, and it's a lot of fun, man. For me, it's like I joke around. It's like getting my PhD in sales, marketing, trying to become a thought leader. I interview, I've had Grant Cardone on my podcast. I've had, guys like Kevin Harrington on my podcast from Shark Tank. And, I just, again, because I'm in the crypto space now, I've had some big players that are in the crypto world. And so for me, it's a great learning experience. While at the same time, I can get that information out to people. And here's the thing, I don't make money with my podcast at all. Some people do. I know like John Lee Dumas tries to show people how to make money doing it and stuff like that. But for me, it just kind of opens doors. It creates relationships, and it might not turn into anything right now, but it may in the future as well. And so I love it. It's really something that you can do inexpensively. I'm guessing you're at your home. I'm not sure. I mean, I happen to have a studio because it's a production studio. I'm here at my home now, but we're doing this podcast over software. I got a little microphone. Yours looks a little bit nicer than mine, and we're doing this and we're creating good, valuable content. So it's kind of fun. Really and then you just really never know what it leads to. So if you're trying to build a brand of yourself, or if you're in sales, if you're a consultant or whatever it is, it's a great way to offer value to people. I mean, Gary Vee talks about that. Let's give them stuff. Let's give them, real, free, valuable stuff. And then you want to sell them something later.
Yeah, exactly. And give them a medium to listen to it at their own time, whether they're in the car, or it just gives them, the ability to listen to it when they're ready. And, it's funny. I started Sales is King literally, and, a lot of great stories we've been talking about. A mentor of mine I went to, and we were kicking things around. I was out on the West Coast, and he was a huge podcast listener, and I had never really listened to podcasts. And so I started downloading all these podcasts. And he said, you should do one on sales. You've been in sales a zillion years. So literally did Sales is King just for fun, just started spewing things out, and then got actually people calling in saying, hey, can you come in and help our team? They love your training. And I'm like, what training? So suddenly, a business developed. But they say podcasting is the new selling, but it is a lot of fun, and it's a great way to get people to, talk about issues and deliver value. And
it's a great way to network too, right? Like so if you reach out to, again, some of the people, I had Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari and Chuck E. Cheese, is on again, Kevin Harrington. I have had Dean Graziosi, Armando Montalongo, just the list goes on and on. Some people that you would never really be able to reach out to unless you were offering them some sort of value. So my kind of hook with a lot of things I do is I interview, fellow authors, and so if they have a book, I see a book that's coming out, I say, hey, look, why don't you come on and we'll talk about the book. And so that's valuable to them. That's great. It's good content. We push it out. We give it to them. They can do whatever it is they want with it. And so then you're able to, again, develop that rapport with them. And then, moving forward, you just never know. Like, Grant Cardone, how I got on Grant Cardone's Power Players is that my book, Ask More, Get More, was next to his book at all the different airports all over the country. And so I reached out to him and just kind of said that. He said, hey, why don't you come on my come on my show called Power Players. That was the first thing. And then from there, we developed a little bit of a relationship. I'm not like, best friends with him, but I can text him here and there. And then I said, hey, you got your new book coming out called Be Obsessed or Be Average. Right. And I'd love to talk to you about it. He came on, great content. Again, he's got definitely, again, that hustle is there. I mean, he's got that hustle, and, some people, again, love him or hate him. It's just like, but his mentality is almost the same way. It's like, I don't care if you don't like me. That's the thing too. Is like, I also became, he kind of taught me that. Gary Vee also did. I would say those guys did kind of teach me. I don't really care if you don't like me. People say, well, whoa, what? It doesn't bother me. If you don't like me, that's fine. Unfriend me, unfollow me, whatever. Call me a loser. Right. I really don't care. Right. And like Grant really believes that. Gary Vee really believes that. I really believe that too. But you're still gonna feel a little bit if someone's talking shit about you out there. But that's just because we're human. And so I've learned those things. So for me, the podcasting is a great. It's like an education. Again, Zig Ziglar talked about his secretary who had her master's from Automobile University because she used to listen to tapes in the car when she drive back and forth. Podcasting is the same thing. Crypto, how I really started learning about cryptocurrency, about a year ago or less. I just started listening to podcasts. What is this Bitcoin thing? What is blockchain? I don't understand it. I was just listening to podcasts. Right? I love Howard Stern. Rather than listening to Howard Stern, I was just listening to podcasts.
Yeah, so true. Just continuous education while you're in the car, like, instead of putting on music, learn about something. And there's so many experts out there. I I've brought people on my podcast, such as yourself, and I just never even knew about because I just listened to a podcast. I'm like, wow, this guy is great. I got to get this book.
Yeah.
You know, or I got to bring him on, or I got to follow him on Instagram, or I got, you know, and then suddenly you're starting to improve yourself. So it's just a,
and then it can turn into something too. Like a lot of people are so impatient, like they think it's going to happen right now, but it is that relationship. It's that rapport building. It's, you know, like we don't really know each other, you and I right now, but you never know, you know what I mean? And, you know, in the future, you know, it just could develop into something else, you know, be like, hey, well, you remember that time you said this or that? Or the other? I've done speaking gigs, same thing, where I don't get paid anything. I was at a speaking gig with people paying $10,000 a seat and I didn't get paid a dime. But it's turned into great things because I've met a bunch of other people. Like I'm speaking at probably about 5 or 6 crypto shows coming up. And, you know, again, they're not paid gigs. One of them kind of is. But I'm more excited about just meeting people. And some of the things
it's exposure, right? It's just, it's great. So this has been great, Michael. I really appreciate you coming on. This was a great session. Blueprint to Business is this book you guys need to pick up. I'm going to read those other 2 books as well. Any other way we can find you online, or tell us a couple of your handles, whether it's Twitter or Instagram?
Sure, absolutely. You can find me, it's at Mike Alden 2012, ALDEN, on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat. My website is michael-alden.com, and, you know, I'm there. I'm active. I'm, you know, trying to provide content on all those, Twitter, again, Snapchat, Instagram. It's a lot of fun, and, you know, I want to thank you for having me on. I really, really enjoyed it. I think
pleasure.
You're providing great content, and if anybody, you know, has a question, they want to reach out to me, a lot of times it actually is me responding. I've had people, like, say things, and I'm like, no, this is really me. And I'll try and help as best I can.
Yeah, I'm sure you will, because I actually reached out to you on Instagram to come on this program. And right. So
that's how it happens.
He does, you know, he's telling the truth. So hang on one second. I'm just going to sign off. And this is Dan for Sales is King. We'll catch you next time. Happy selling.